Hey, Tim, it's another Friday. We're ready to go.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. And what are we talking about today, Merv?
Well, I think we're still kind of working along the whole idea of getting people ready for the exam and the kinds of things that'll be asked. So today, I think we decided to talk about the project artifacts that one might keep as a project manager.
Yeah, and what they are, how we keep them, and why we do this. That's artifacts are a really funny word. They've PMI has bounced around a lot of words, but it seems that artifacts are they're not only important, but people learning project management gravitate towards them.
Well, and even as I think about that, even when people have asked me for templates, things that I have used on prior projects that were perfectly fine for the project we're about to start or about to or about to work on, they look at the template and they go, no, I need to make it mine. I need to change something, right? And it's like, it's a template. I don't care if you change it. It's a guideline. It helps you.
Right.
I remember the old days. So I said I told my kids I'd never say that, but I'm going to say that. Remember the old days when basically our artifacts were a project schedule, a Gantt chart that we put on a wall, our requirements definition, which would go for several hundred pages. Sometimes our client made us deliver a design document, which went for more hundreds of pages, and then the programs themselves. Once in a while, we'd get brought in to do their training and that sort of thing. So we'd have to show some training guides, but the artifacts back in the old days weren't that extensive. Now it seems like you've got an artifact for everything.
Yeah. We actually topped out in the 6th edition of the PMBOK with 33 different projects, different project documents and updates and templates and that kind of stuff. And the deliverable itself can be actually called a artifact too. But then you look in Agile and you say, boy, there's a bunch of other documents that I need to have. And you look over now at the process group practice guide and you say there's even more for traditional project management than there ever has been. And we're saying, is all this necessary? That's the question right there. Is all this documentation necessary?
Well, and I wonder, have we really made things overly complex? And that, sometimes I wonder, for example, we used to do a project plan, which basically outlined what you would do, whose responsibility was what, and the schedule. Now the project plan is many artifacts, of which things like the Agile management plan, the documentation management plan, the risk management plan, and goes on and on and on, which could create one big plan. But each one of those is a discrete artifact that someone looks at and someone holds you to.
Yeah, that's the problem, and we can actually go through documents and say, for all projects, this has to be formal and this was written. And then look at another set of documents that are say, these are supplementary and they're inferred through this part of the project management plan. But at the same time, if we need to focus this as critical for project success, let's make it formal. Yeah. For instance, stakeholder register, right? At its very basic, a stakeholder register is what? It's a contact list. It shows the people who I need to talk about because for some reason they're important for project success. And I will have that regardless.
Yeah. And, stakeholder register, the contact list has now become what? Who's important? Who does what? Who do I go to for this? Who gets to be put on a memo? Who doesn't get to be put on a memo? And, it goes on and on. So, I guess I shouldn't complain too much. It just seems to be a lot of upfront work. If it's used, as you said originally, if it's used and used well, then it's perfectly okay. But if it's just there to tick a box and put off to the side and never be looked at again, we do an awful lot of work sometimes as project managers for little reward if we don't follow up on those particular documents and artifacts.
That's one of the biggest questions that I have for my students. How do you select things whether or not they're necessary. And it's sort of like it's sort of like optimal quality. It's the same thing. When I'm spending too much time and money on doing something for what it gets out, that's when we get in trouble. Like you said, first thing in this show, we do all these documents for little reward. And those are the documents that, next project, let's deprioritize those unless a primary stakeholder says they need it.
Yeah. Well, and actually, as an internal organization, let's say you have a methodology that you do every project by that methodology, then it just makes sense to have a single, for example, test management plan that you refer to. You don't have to come up with one for every single project with little tweaks. So there are things that you can do to make your time on the project more efficient. Unfortunately, I come from the world of contracting, where I go from client to client, depending on what the next bid is that I win. And each client wants one of those things for themselves, right? So we end up redoing with nuance many of the artifacts that we've already done in the past.
So let's actually back up a little bit here and do our audience a service. First of all, what do we mean by artifacts? And second of all, what do we mean about the management of these?
Yeah, let me start. For me, I'm growing up in the contracting world. To us, an artifact was anything that we needed to deliver a final project result. So whether it's, you mentioned templates up front, every deliverable to us was an artifact. Memorandum, for example, if we had certain memorandum that went to our client that were formal, those went into a artifact registry for formal memorandum. So anything basically that is a documentation or a process by which you move forward on the project becomes a project artifact. Any output, any deliverable, any document that way. So
yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. And actually, I would only add one thing. Let's go ahead and define project document as a container of project information. Okay. And that actually prioritizes, what the value of a project document is. It holds project information that's necessary for successful completion.
And I may go as far in my definition as even things like a proof of concept that I eventually throw away. For the time that it's alive, it's an artifact.
Right, exactly. It's supplementary, but it's necessary for the success of the project. It is, and again, a lot of other project managers might call those supplementary deliverables or secondary deliverables. But yeah, it's still an artifact.
Yeah. Or work products, I think, is another name I've heard used a lot. So
yeah.
So and you had a second question. What was
the second one is, what do we call these management artifacts, and how do we manage these artifacts well?
Boy, that's where a lot of projects run into trouble, and even mature organizations seem to kind of second guess themselves on their next project. It becomes fairly easy when you think of, let's say, SharePoint or some sort of repository like that for your documentation. Or you might think of an ALM tool or something like a Jira or something to house your test results or your design documentation or something. So the problem is we've got so many great tools, people forget where they put things, or if they don't forget where they put things, they don't develop a good folder structure so you can find things easily. And so that becomes part of it. But yeah, we've got some incredible project management tools, but are we as projects using them well?
See, that's the trick. We're not developing a repository of documents. We're creating or we're developing a system of documents. It's the handling of the documents plus the tools that we use.
Well, and even once you get into developing a system, your program modules become version controlled in some sort of repository, which is again a different repository, or could be a different repository.
Yeah, and this is what's wild. Configuration management, we understand, from coming up, and growing within the sector of IT, information technology. Configuration management is just that: tests and inspections and version control, that validate the deliverable. Well, why don't we apply that configuration management in the same manner to the documents and the information we manage as well?
It's almost as though we need a card catalog, like the old Dewey Decimal System in our library, to be able to find our way around our repositories.
So here's another question that we can play with. A lot of my students say, I have a lot of documents here and they have a lot of information, like a stakeholder register. I may say some things that hurt people's feelings. Should I even expose that stakeholder register to my stakeholders? What's your take on that?
Well, my first take is don't put things in writing that you might hurt people's feelings. I mean, you can be candid without being sort of
hurtful. Yeah,
hurtful or something. But no, I think the tack that I've always taken, and I've learned from the companies that I've been employed by or contracted with, the tack we've always taken is it's based on a need to know and a right to know. So, and let me give you a very practical example. Let's say I'm working for the client organization. And so I meet with my system integrator, the people, my IT service provider. I meet with them, let's say weekly, to go through my risk register. There may be risks that I, on the client side, have that I don't want my system integrator to know. For example, I may have some personnel issues, or I may have, some things that are risking the project from my perspective that I need to handle without sort of opening the kimono, as they say, to my system integrator. Because even though we're a team, there are some things that we have to keep in the family.
Right.
So a situation like that, I would say there are ways to do a wall so that, you can see what you need to see as a combined team, but those things that are within the family, we keep within the family.
Well, and yeah, we see this as business requirement too. If you're a consultant and you're under contract, you're going to have the needs of the project, of the client, and the relationship there. You're right. There has to be some confidentiality, but at the same time, we have to really understand that there are ethics involved here, and it's right to expose information that people need to perform their job on this project. So I think you're in agreement. You and I are in agreement here. There is transparency that's necessary, but we share information that's appropriate for what our roles are.
Yeah, and I've taken another tack. The other side of that coin is sometimes I overshare the things. For example, I may have a second year systems analyst on my project who is just coming along and really learning the ropes in terms of what their particular responsibility is. Now, there may be documents out there that he or she would not yet understand, but that doesn't mean I keep them from that person. Because I know from my own experience, when I was a younger person, I would grab documents like that and go over them in the evenings just to see if I could understand and then ask questions later. But the idea was that my project manager did not withhold those things from me because I wasn't ready for them. So in that case, I may be oversharing, but that's fine as long as the folks can learn from what it is that I'm sharing.
Yeah, and there's a simple rule you can boil all this down to. It's called necessary.
Yeah.
Right. Should I share this? Does it make the project more successful? Does it keep it from failure? And the problem is people get curious when information is withheld.
Yeah.
And curiosity builds an emotional state such that it becomes more important than the work they're getting done. So it can be a distraction.
I was just, as you paused there after the word curiosity, I was looking to see if your cat was around.
No, they're curious in another part of the house.
So they're not missing unintentionally. What do you think are the more critical artifacts that we absolutely have to have on a project?
Ooh, you mentioned some, didn't you?
I think I did.
Let's see, you got the schedule. You got the roles and responsibilities. We could call that Reiki chart and stakeholder register.
That's a good one.
If they don't have that, they're not going to understand the work they're supposed to do. How about risk register and issue log? What do you feel about those?
They're absolutely critical. They're so critical that we set up weekly meetings on all the projects I've ever been on. We set up weekly meetings to make sure that those are getting taken care of. Yes, risk register, issue register.
Yeah, and I like your approach to plan too. Plan is the project management plan. And again, based on the needs of the project, quality will really be well defined and risk will be well defined, or maybe more informal, but there is a plan.
That's true.
And also, a lot of these documents, the document themselves may not be as important as the process in building the documents, like quality management plan. Okay, let's build a quality management plan. And somebody says, Tim, well, they didn't mention Six Sigma or ISO 10,000, so it's not going to be important. Okay, that's fine. We did the work of quality management planning, the process of getting to a document that says quality management is secondary, and we're going to approach quality as a group of activities that ensures we're doing work correctly. And that's our quality management plan.
Well, and it also sets standards for both sides of the equation. I am your system integrator. This is what you expect from me. You are my client. This is what I expect from you. So it doesn't hurt to have that whole idea, because both sides have to contribute to quality.
Yeah, and that's what we forget. Whether we're under contract or not, there is a team, a sponsor, and a project manager, and there are stakeholders. There's even informally, without a document that legally binds you, there is a buyer and a seller, and there is a relationship. And these documents, the best documents, highlight the roles and responsibility of the quote unquote buyer and the quote unquote seller.
So even though a quality management plan is important, it's probably not one that I go to every day, say like my project schedule or my risk register, but it's there.
There's a class of documents that I don't know are actually used. See, when you're working with teams, you need about 4 different types of documents. You need something that says, here's a schedule and scope, and here's the timing of the development of that scope. You need a calendar or a schedule or a combination of both. You need some justification for saying, here's what success looks like at the end. You need to define that. And that's where your scope comes in. And that's your work breakdown structure, your scope statement, and your baseline, right?
Yep.
I want to talk about the WBS because I think it's critical, but I want to hold off on that in a few minutes. And then you have all these supplementary things that we could call communications. I really do believe that just the act of communicating is a series of documents, and we need to be able to organize those as well.
We do, and especially there has to be a better way. I don't know if you found a better way, but to be able to categorize emails. Because so often I say, oh, I remember you sent that to me 6 months ago, or maybe was it 4 months ago, or maybe. So there has to be a way, and maybe this is incumbent on the individual to be able to take memorandum, get rid of ones that are just cluttering your inbox or your folder structure, and keep hold of those that you need to refer to often. So again, is that a project artifact? Yes. Is it something I refer to daily? Not daily, but certainly on an ad hoc basis, and I want to be able to get to it quickly.
So you just said, I want to get to these documents quickly. And earlier you said it's critical to organize your document management in a meaningful way so people can find things quickly.
Yes.
I have an idea. Let's take a work breakdown structure, right?
Okay.
A WBS. Let's add an indexing system. And then what we can do is put a code of accounts. And we can actually do all sorts of management on that. Use that index as the structure of your knowledge management. Even you go so far as that index to organize your emails. So you can create filters that says this is work package 1.2.9.12, right? And then just somehow index each email according to the work package. How's that for the structure of a project and the information?
I think that would work based on the individual's commitment to keeping that structure for themselves.
Fair enough.
But it does make sense, and particularly in that same structure, if you say, well, these sorts of documents you'll find in SharePoint. These sorts of documents you're going to find in ALM Octane. These sorts of documents you're going to find in Copado. Yeah, so there's all sorts of techniques and tricks and things that you need to be able to deal with.
See, and that's the purpose of a work breakdown structure dictionary. It's to hold all of this non-scope stuff in an organized form. So when you get to planning or analyzing or controlling various work packages or various other aspects of the project, you have all this stuff that you've captured along the way in order to relate back to.
Yeah, and it's the thing I like now is Microsoft Project has come a long way so that you can set up so many more columns that you can filter on. And so that could be easily done. The other thing that I rely on heavily is within Outlook. We use Outlook primarily on many of my projects. Within Outlook or even within other structures, the search functionality now has gotten very, very strong, so you can find things quicker. Because for those people who are not organized, they still need to find that old memo.
Right, exactly. And when we don't have tools like SharePoint and Outlook, what we have to do is fall back on manual tools like the naming convention of the files or time date stamping in a text file or color coding in a spreadsheet. And we only remind ourselves how this works when we open the file and we say, what do I mean by that? And it takes time to catch up.
Yeah. Which color am I using for this type of document? I'm not sure anymore.
Exactly.
You reminded me of something, and that's my early days. Again, early days. You reminded me, how did we ever survive when we had, I'd come back to my office after lunch and I'd have 14 pink slips on my desk. That was before email, how did we survive when we had a stenographer typing our memos?
Well, let me put it this way. How did we survive on $20,000 a year when we were very young and just starting off on our own, either as a family or single? We didn't know any better. So we found the best way to do it then. And then as these tools grew and mature around us, we were able to adopt the ones that made common sense.
Yeah. And the artifact, maybe that's why our library of artifacts continues to grow, because they can.
Well, yeah, and it's human nature to do this, and it's good practice to do this too. You don't hold on to tools or processes that don't give you value anymore. And that's why we move to these things. And if it's not SharePoint, we move to Google, because you can roll back changes for 2 or 3 documents back, or you go through Dropbox, because you can have group collaboration and change management and version control very easily, right?
Yeah, the tools that they have now, they're incredible. And maybe that's why we have much more complex projects that we can conduct as well, because the tools allow us to do that. So
yeah, isn't that amazing?
But all of this conversation leads me to, we talked about indexing before. How do we set up some sort of an information system or a management system for our projects? How do we, what are some of the ideas around setting up a project management information system? It's like that card catalog again, right?
So I think of it like I thought of how to teach Boy Scouts how to build up a campsite. There are fundamental things that have to have in place. You have to have a kitchen area. You have to have a bear bag to hold the food. You have to have the tents, and you have to have them all set up in a certain way. There's like a limited set of things, like what you and I talked about. Here's the limited documents. Here's the limited organization. And then as the unique characteristics of that campsite develop, we're going to be here for 2 or 3 days. You can allow the common sense and just the natural process of the growth of the project and how it matures to help define what else needs beyond those fundamentals.
So that would be your camping management information system.
Exactly. And like what we said, you have your plan, you have the different aspects of the plan, you have the documents that talk about roles and responsibilities, you have all these other things. So camping, again, you can actually have not just camping as a project, but you can have the management of camping information as project management information system that works really well too. Again, you start off with some basic fundamental understandings, what are required and necessary for every project, and then it grows and matures as the project demonstrates and exposes its unique characteristics.
And what frustrates me beyond no end is you set up a wonderful indexing system, a wonderful project management information. It's all there. And then people who are required to deposit into the repository don't put it where it's supposed to be.
Well, it's not just that. I actually, and this is not denigrating my students, because I do this too. We have a shared folder for our class files, right? And I come back to that to update the notes that we took and update the dashboard. And all of a sudden I see a new folder there. Okay, who created that folder? Why do you need it? And what purpose is it setting? We have to talk about not necessarily laws and policy, but we have to talk about, ground rules and norms about actually storing, organizing, and managing this. It's beneficial to collaborate, but at the same time, if that collaboration gets to create so much noise you can't get to the information, it breaks the purpose of sharing this.
Well, I had slightly the opposite experience on a recent project where I went to the folder structure was perfect. It was beautiful set up. It was well named. You could find things. I'd go into the proper folder structure to pull out, say, the project schedule. It wasn't there. So I'd go to another folder structure for another document. It wasn't there. So I'd call up somebody who was supposed to be managing all this. Oh, yeah, we moved that to... But they didn't tell anybody that they moved it. So we're supposed to understand that. And so in the meantime, I'm spending precious moments of my day looking for things I need. And someone just decided that they had a better idea.
Yeah. And this is the problem. We work in a collaborative environment that allows this flexibility. And yet we need some form of discipline. I tell you this, I think about this all the time. We see discipline as a constraint, right? It limits you. No, discipline protects you.
Yes.
Discipline is the framework that allows you the freedom to do what you need. It's a healthy thing that allows us to do what we need.
I have a buddy who runs a local automotive repair shop. Oh, couldn't say that word. He's probably got 6 or 7 bays. I'm not sure how many mechanics, but I went into one time and I'm just kind of walking through the shop with him, and I'm watching the mechanics. They do something and they put their tools back in the exact spot that they took them from. Car goes out, next car comes in, reaches for the tool without even looking, and gets to work. Without that sort of, as you called it, discipline, without that sort of garage management information system, imagine how much time would get wasted if you dropped your tool over here, then you're looking around for it for the next automobile. It just makes a lot of sense to be that disciplined in your daily approach to work.
Well, the restaurant industry is the same thing. And in fact, they have a name for this, a French name. It's called mise en place. Everything has its place.
Yes.
You pick something up, it's ready to be used. You use it, you put it back so that it's in the same state as when you picked it up, whether it's food, whether it's a tool, or whether it's cleaning agents, it doesn't matter. So the thing is, if you do this right, number one, everybody has what they need or knows how to get it. And number two, at the end of the shift at the night, closing the restaurant down is merely a validation activity. It's not
Right.
hustling and bustling. And if you do this in projects, if mise en place is part of the team charter, closing a project should be no more than a validation exercise.
Exactly. And I'm just looking around my office right now. I am set up. I am actually doing this podcast from my office. And if I were to lower my desk, one would see everything within I hardly have to ever get out of my chair to find something. I can open drawers. I know exactly where everything is. But of course, this day and age, we use very little paper anymore anyway. Typically, it's on our hard drives. So our hard drives or our cloud drives or wherever we put things have to also be organized. And it's all a function of being that efficient so that you can find things very quickly and be able to progress from there.
So I started off as a project manager in transportation companies, moving boxes, whether it's from state to state, nation to nation, or airplane or whatever, it's moving boxes. And they had a whole section of the company called industrial engineering, where they looked at how many steps you need to take, how many actions you need to take in order to pick up a box, go over to somewhere else and set it down. They were that much into efficiency. Now, I'm not saying that every project needs that, but let's look at our artifacts that we're picking up, moving, and setting down. If we want an orderly project, number one, we see the common sense, but we only apply that industrial engineering level of control only when we have thousands of work packages. And then all of a sudden the benefits are really huge. Until then, all you need are some steps and procedures. You can allow for a little bit of human exception, but at the same time, we have to start off with some baseline.
Well, and what you just said really rings true, because if you have a project with thousands of work packages, that means you have tens or hundreds of workers. And so they all have to be disciplined to keep things in the exact same place. So here's my next question for you, Tim. You've got a team of individuals who have the need to know, the right to know, also the need to update and the right to update certain documents. how is it that we can control that so that the team can make changes to the document, but we don't lose track of where those documents are, what the changes are. And let me ask it this way as well. And so that I, as the project manager, am not having to do everything by myself. I'm delegating.
So
Was that too long a question?
no, and that's a brilliant question. How can I apply this level of control to so many people? I'm never going to have enough time to talk to each one.
That's a much more succinct way of phrasing it.
So
Yeah.
I apply a human behavioral approach to this. I can actually build a professional relationship with any human being by setting aside 15 minutes a day over coffee, not in a meeting, not solving business problems, building a relationship. And that's the only objective, to have that 15-minute conversation. If I do that, we will develop trust. Now, I'm not going to be able to do that with 50 people.
Right.
I can do that with 7. I can afford to set aside, what is it? 1 3/4 hours to actually have those conversations, whether it's over Zoom or face to face. Now, that means I'm going to have project management team. I'm going to have 7 leads, and then I'm going to coach them to have their 7 leads. So each one understands accountability and responsibility. This is, like you said, this is delegation. And we have to have one common team charter up and down this chain, such that we actually are committed and understand the value of managing these artifacts, managing this information.
Well, and then it comes down to, then with that kind of discipline and that sort of scope of control that you put on yourself and on your project, now I have time, and now my leads have time to actually work with staff so that I can feel free and feel comfortable to delegate what they can do in terms of making changes, making updates, making new artifacts, putting them into the correct repositories without me having to do all the work myself.
Yes. Now, it changes the role of a project manager. All of a sudden, you're not doing the validation. You're not doing the technical activity. You're taking on more of a leadership executive role, where you're focusing more on influence and motivation. And this is, again, this is that fine line between, am I managing the work or am I managing the people?
Yeah.
And it depends on the needs of the project.
Well, and I tell you, and maybe this is my problem, but one of the things that I like to do still, particularly with deliverables that are paid for by my client, I still like to take that final work product and go through it myself.
Yeah.
And sit down with the eyes of the client now, in terms of what my staff person has written or produced. And as a result of that, then I can also offer coaching as part of that. So I haven't actually produced or updated the document or the deliverable or the artifact, but I've been there in a coaching mode so that by the time it gets delivered to my client, it's in good quality standard.
So here's the thing. All of my students ask one common question when they start off being project managers. Do I just have to focus on project management, or do I need a skill that's required for the project? And as you mature, you focus more on the skills of the management of the project, which has to do with leadership and, the understanding of how work fits together, the integration stuff, and less on things like, how do I build a database? How do I connect it in a network, and that kind of thing? And those are the things that you can easily delegate. So when you do step aside, you're actually playing a more strategic role, which is the relationship with the consumer or the end user. And you're not making your team wrong. you're actually helping expose the things that you can actually help improve. This is the life cycle of a project manager. If you find yourself doing more of this leadership stuff, you're growing and you're taking on the things that you should be looking at.
But I will offer this one caution to our fledgling project managers, actually even to our mature project managers. Just because you're working your way up to that senior project management level doesn't mean that you abandon those sorts of qualities so that suddenly you are just a leader of people and not worried about the work product or whatever. You still want to have some control, some hands-on quality review, something, so that because your name is the one that's on that artifact that goes to your client, or your name is on the conduct of that person in the next meeting. So you still have to have, you can't just abandon people. You still have to have that one-on-one or that one-on-many kind of review and coaching process, mentoring process.
Boy, isn't this job complicated?
But it's fun.
Yes, it is so much fun. We've gone from looking at documents and looking at information and trying to manage it. We're looking at, controlling the behavior of people so it's managed well. We're talking about, the purpose and the meaning of organizing documents. One of the things we have not talked about is lessons learned. How much time do you set aside to go through previous project documents in order to actually either validate or reuse things you've learned?
I don't know that I could quantify that, but we do with my team and with my client. Often we do a lessons learned exercise, probably after each major phase or each major area. So if I'm doing say a waterfall project and I finish my requirements definition, I may stop at that point and take a day and do a lessons learned. So I don't know that I can quantify it, Tim, but I can certainly say that we do that. We look back at what could have been done better. We look back at where those who were critiquing our work or who were recipients of our work complained to us about something. So we improve those areas. So yeah, we're always doing the lessons learned and hopefully improving. Well, typically we do improve as a result of that.
Yeah. And the more formal it is, the more guaranteed it is, it's actual improvement.
So let me
throw
it. Hold on to that thought. I just want to finish my thought. I'm going to throw something at you. I recently had an experience with an IT service company, IT development company, and they produced a couple of deliverables that I had the privilege of reviewing and providing feedback. The content overall wasn't bad. It could be deepened a little bit. It was a little general, but I made a lot of comments about their lack of grammar. And in this day and age with Word and WordPerfect and those kinds of tools, their spelling mistakes. They got a little uppity with me because of the whole idea that I was questioning their grammar and their style and that. And I just basically came back and said, if I can't trust your spelling and your grammar, how can I trust your content? Because quality is quality is quality. If you're putting your name on that document, aren't you proud of it enough to give me a fully, completely, properly spelled document, properly grammarly with punctuation? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
So there's two automatic thoughts that come up. I worked in building and upgrading cell towers and central offices and data centers. A lot of my work was in telecommunications, and inspection of those got down to the level of you had to have knots that tie cables down every 18 inches. And if you're using wax thread, you have to use very specific knots. The purpose of that was to actually create this ultimate discipline on this. It's exactly what you say. Every inspector I talked to said, the knots are not important in themselves, but they demonstrate how diligent the people are in their attention to detail.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
The
Yeah.
second piece of this is communications. I have observed this in my classes. If I misspell a bullet on a PowerPoint slide, they'll spend 5 minutes on telling me there's a misspell, and I won't have any time to talk about the information behind it.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's human behavior to focus on the grammar problems. So I always think about that when I read my emails or a document, that, do I want them to focus on the fact that I'm misspelling something, or I'm actually I want them to focus on this. So get rid of that. And it's easy. It just takes practice, and you have to turn it into a habit.
Yeah.
But once you get that out of the way, it's easy to do those things, and all of a sudden there's fewer distractions.
But in that case, I would have rather had the IT person take it as a lesson learned rather than an opportunity to discredit my review of their document. But anyway.
Yeah. Whenever I'm working with young engineers or young project managers, I always start off with, I'm not making you wrong. You're great here. This is good content. But at the same time, these are simple things that can improve it tenfold.
Anyway, I interrupted you. You had a thought?
No, actually, I covered those pretty well. No,
okay.
Now to close out on this, and I think you and I see it from the same perspective. Number one, it shows our ability to focus attention to detail, and number two, it actually removes distraction from people who find misspells instead of looking for the message behind the words.
Yeah. So I think in terms of, we can probably just about wind this up, but I think in terms of what you summarized about 4 minutes ago, then you brought this kind of all together. And I think if I were a young project manager listening to Tim and Merv today, I would definitely pay attention to indexing and organizing all of my project artifacts and paying attention to quality. I don't know if that's a good worthy summary, or if we can add more.
Yes, and I would only add to that what you said, which is, as I get more and more strategic in my projects, I cannot forget that attention to detail. It doesn't go away. I delegate the work, but in the end, I'm accountable for the results.
And I think what's made me effective, I'll just kind of close with this. I think what's made me effective over the years is that I practiced first, preached later. In other words, I made sure that if I was going to tout a skill to my client or to the people I was overseeing, I had to have done it first. So there's those things that I have to have done first before I can truly preach them as a project manager.
There's a very precise word in leadership that actually encapsulates that. It's called integrity.
Oh yeah. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, your actions and your words must say the same thing, or people won't listen to you.
Well, here we are. We covered almost an hour on a boring subject like project deliverables. But I think just from our experience, I think we can say that we put this one to bed with some very strong recommendations for anyone listening to us.
Yeah, and it isn't boring. by no means. And it's not boring when we do it right. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks again. Where can we find you this week if we want to reach out to you, Merv?
I'm always available on LinkedIn. So just Merv Jersak you'll find my LinkedIn profile. I'm always trolling there to see what people have to say, things that I can glean for my own projects, my own edification. As you've listened to this and think of it, just go on LinkedIn and hit us both. Just say, I love this part, or can you explain this part better? And we'd be happy to explain things back or just respond to you in that way.
That would be great. Well, thanks again, Merv. It's always a joy, and looking forward to furthering our conversations in this direction.
Absolutely. Until next time.